welcome to What the Wrestling, a show where I take a look at the antics of the various wrestling companies in the last month that really made me scratch my head out of confusion and maybe rage. There wasn't a huge amount this month. Let's start off with something befitting of the season. Over on Impact, the self-proclaimed TNA champion, Moose, had seen his title belt abducted by one EC3, who seems to be either haunting Moose with strange supernatural powers he never had before, or Moose is suffering a mental breakdown and seeing and hearing EC3 everywhere, and we're somehow able to see and hear that ourselves. This is something that does actually bother me. When someone is suffering a mental breakdown, we shouldn't actually be seeing what they're seeing. So it actually leads me to believe that EC3 had somehow obtained supernatural powers and is actually haunting Moose. Speaking of supernatural powers, the demon assassin, Rosemary, and John E. Bravo are planning a wedding. And every single aspect of this wedding is getting more and more absurd, including a battle between Fallah Bahh and Johnny Swinger over who would be the best man. Rosemary, in the meantime, is attempting to resurrect the only person she can think of who is qualified to officiate a demon wedding. While we're on the topic of the best man and resurrection, Heath for Impact. Heath Slater has been sneaking into Impact Wrestling in the attempts to obtain a job. He does, after all, need the money. He's got kids. To this effect, he's taken out a large loan to run an advertising campaign in order to convince the people that he should be in Impact and should petition the company to let him in. Hashtag Heath for Impact. These commercials, of course, are completely ridiculous and over the top, not only with campiness, but the low production value. And I love it. Over to AEW, we have another wedding and another best man. Kip Sabian and Penelope Ford are getting hitched, and they've declared who their best man for their wedding is going to be. The best man being the best man, Milo, or as we would know him from WWE, Rusev, coming down to the ring as, quote-unquote, the best man. And since he's the best man, he's the best man to be Kip's best man. As silly as that is, it's a little slightly frustrating that Milo had publicly said that he was done with wrestling. Apparently, he just was done with WWE. During September, in the WWE, we had a very interesting moment or two with the Intercontinental title. Jeff Hardy had recently defeated AJ Styles and was holding on to the Intercontinental Championship. When Sami Zayn comes out with his own Intercontinental title and claims he never actually lost the title, that he was forced to not be able to compete for several months, and WWE just decided to hand over the belt through a tournament, which AJ Styles had won. So while Jeff Hardy is holding on to a Intercontinental title belt, AJ Styles is wanting to invoke a rematch clause and get back his Intercontinental title. All the while, Zayn is considering them both to be frauds and is the real Intercontinental title holder. This is a silly bit of confusion. To be honest, I did kind of dig it, especially when it did ultimately come to a fun little ladder match at Clash of Champions to legitimize everything. A match in which Sami Zayn actually did come down as the undisputed Intercontinental Champion, and then later complained about having to do so in the first place, because it was his by right from the start. Also in WWE, the current holder of the Money in the Bank contract, Otis, had been dealing with the attempts of John Morrison and Mike Mizanin, The Miz, who had been trying to take his Money in the Bank contract from him, believing him to not be worthy of the opportunity. This went anywhere from stealing the briefcase only to find that Otis had put a large sandwich in there and instead put the contract in his lunchbox, to other crazy antics to try to get that contract away from Otis. Ultimately, they decided to do less shenanigans and more legal action, as they came to the conclusion that putting the contract in a lunchbox was in fact criminal negligence against the Money in the Bank title contract. And so, Otis is being sued for the rightful possession of the contract. It really should be up to the company itself if WWE has a problem with this. They are the ones, after all, who technically own everything under that building. I think more on this story in the next episode, since it's still developing. Speaking of developing, Alexa Bliss seems to be developing an interesting predicament after her encounter with Bray Wyatt, the Fiend. Lately, she has been spacing out, performing Bray Wyatt's finisher, Sister Abigail, and overall acting possessed. Now, this is off and on, but what seems to be suggested here is that the Fiend kind of planted a demonic mind virus in Alexis, and now she is slowly becoming like him. It's some of that supernatural stuff that only a few characters can pull off, and yet, I don't know. I'm a mixed bag of it. Alexis is actually acting really well here. It's actually pretty convincing. I'll have to let you know more about this when next episode comes around. In October. Well, for October. But until then, this was What the Wrestling? And I'll see you next match.